Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. As always, I'm Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And if you'll notice behind me, it looks a little bit different than normal. I am not in my normal Florida spring environment. I'm traveling right now up in the Northeast, so I do not have my little studio-esque gear with me. So please enjoy this lovely blank wall behind me while you get to see Alex's nice tropical water. Alex has just returned from the Red Sea. So we have a whole bunch of different stuff to talk about. But the first thing we're going to talk about is probably the one that everybody's most excited for, and that is Nauticam's MFO-2. Oh, no, see?
Oh!
The confusingly named MFO-3, because
Yeah,
there is no MFO-2. Alex has it there.
with
And one of the things that,
MFO-2 written on it,
yes,
but it
one
is
of the
in
things that
fact.
I'm hoping that Alex can answer for us is whether the MFO-3 finally does away with all of those wishes and wants for a macro zoom lens underwater that I know a lot of people have been interested in the past. And then we'll talk about all sorts of other things with regards to it. So I will let Alex talk about this because I have not shot it underwater yet, and he has.
Sure. Well, it's a new lens from Nauticam. It's a wet lens, so you put it on the front of your macro lens. And the MFO-3, I know this one does say 2 on it, but when it's launched, it's going to be called MFO-3. And the aim of this lens is it turns your macro lens into a wider macro lens. So if you shoot 100mm or 105mm, it's turning that 105mm into a 60mm. If you shoot a 90mm like Matthew and I do, it's turning that into a 50mm kind of thing. It's quite difficult to judge how much wider it makes it, but I would say at the very least it makes that much of a change, if not slightly more. I can hold it in front of my webcam and you can see, if I pointed at me, I don't know if you can see me.
Yeah.
It makes things quite a lot wider. And I've got some before and after pictures to show you in a minute. The confusion over the naming is that Nauticam have officially launched a product called the MFO-1 last year. At the time, we tested 2 different prototypes for the MFO-1, and they very nearly launched both of them. And to the point that actually a couple of web pages were made with one of the prototypes for the MFO-1. And that was labeled MFO-2. It never got any further than that, but it was just like it was being discussed and a website got built. Then 6 months later, a year later, this lens came about, which is a very, very different lens to the MFO-1. But because it does the focus optimization, it pulls your focus range closer to the camera. It's part of the MFO family, and it was going to be called 2 until someone pointed out, is this the same as the other one? And this one person asking Nauticam that question, and they asked me the same question as well, actually, when I was shooting it, I think made Nauticam go, oh gosh, we don't want to confuse people. We'll call it 3, which is fine, except now Nauticam are going to have hundreds of people asking them, where is the MFO-2? So maybe in the future they'll have to launch an MFO-2 just to satisfy people about it. But anyway, it will be known. So despite my one having MFO-2 written on it, it will be known as the MFO-3 forevermore. And this is the lens that is really, I think, a very unique product in underwater photography because it turns your standard macro lens into a wider macro lens. Now, as with the MFO-1, I asked Nauticam to make this lens. They don't do everything I ask, I can assure you. But this was one that really piqued their curiosity as both technically whether it could be done at a high quality and also how useful it would be. And Edward from Nauticam laboured away on this design. I asked him at the end of my Blackwater trip back in March, and by June or by the end of May, actually, they had working prototypes, which was the same as the final design, which is really exciting. I asked them to make that lens because having just been on a Blackwater trip, I had all these Canon users with 100 mils and Sony users with 90 mils all going, oh, I wish we had a wider macro lens. And the motivation was really to say, well, why don't we make this as a wet lens? Because then you can use the really good autofocus from your 100 mil and use this lens as a front piece. But what I discovered using it is actually, rather than it just being simply an alternative macro lens, it's the flexibility having this on your camera gives you underwater that's most exciting. And that was something of a surprise to me, just because I didn't ask them so I could have the two lenses on a dive with me. But actually, the reason I really liked it was because it meant that on every macro lens, every macro dive, I was diving with both macro lenses. And for years and years, underwater photographers said, "Oh, I know it's a macro dive, but is it the 60 or the 105? Is it a 50 or 60 or the 90 mil?" And now you don't have to ask that question. You can have both of them there all the time. The other thing that really surprised me about it is that I don't like flip filters for my close-up lenses underwater until I had this. And now I really like using it on a flip filter, which I'm embarrassed about. And I know you won't I have to apologize to Matthew because neither of us really like those flip things that get in the way. But actually, this on the flip is brilliant. It is quite big. And I think the first thing I thought when I saw it is, oh my gosh, that's going to be really hard to shoot. And it's going to stick out a long way from the camera. I'll run some video of me shooting it, and you can see it's very well balanced. But the reason it's well balanced is all the weight is down the back of the lens. The front element, behind that, there's a big airspace, which is a part of producing the optical effect. And as a result, the lens weight is all at the back. So it's very close to neutral underwater, just slightly negative, so it doesn't float away. But it really is very comfortable on the end of the housing, very surprisingly so. And I lent it to a number of people on the thing, and everyone just got along with it straight away. And I would say that was perhaps the biggest surprise of using it, was that it doesn't weigh the camera down. It's really easy to dive with. It's really easy to control. And on that flip filter, you can just pull it into position, do some shots, pull it out the way, do some shots. One thing I would say that I don't understand about it is that when you do flip it into position and do some shots, the pictures are slightly brighter than when you're not using it. And I'm not sure whether this is because it's squashing a bigger scene onto the same, and there should be there's some sort of aperture shift, not on the lens, or whether it's because of the refocusing of the lens, there's an aperture shift there. Yeah. But I would say it's about 2/3 of a stop brighter, your picture, when you flip it in. So you kind of get used to flipping it in and then just closing the aperture a couple of clicks so that you don't have to change your strobe powers. I mean, a lot of people probably won't even notice this. But I'm fussy about these things. And I notice if my pictures just jump a little bit in exposure. They're still like completely within the range that is completely correctable. But I just mentioned that as a passing thing. To finally answer your big question, which is it a zoom? Or does it answer that long-held dream of having a zoom lens underwater? That's kind of what I thought was most impressive about it. Is that I've often said, I would love to have a 50 to 150 mil zoom underwater. But I was well aware that if I had a zoom, I'd always pretty much use it at one end or the other. Because if the subject was big, I'd use it at the 50 end. If the subject was smaller, I wanted to be further away, I'd zoom it all the way in. I was probably, people with zoom lenses pretty used to the fact that you tend to use them at the two ends much more than in the middle. Certainly in a macro situation where you do have some flexibility to move in and out. So actually, I think this certainly satisfies my desire for a macro zoom, because I can now dive with the two lenses. If it's a big subject, I shoot it with the equivalent of a 50 mil. If it's a small subject, I shoot it with the equivalent of a 90 mil. And I really like that combo. You can't add any extra close-up lenses to this one. But of course, if you've got this on one flip and you have a double flip, you could have an MFO-1, an SMC-3, or any other close-up diopter on the other flip to give you even more flexibility on a dive.
So the other question I wanted to ask was obviously about the image quality, and two parts. One, is it better than a 60 mil behind a flat port? And then two, or 50, how does it compare to those shorter macro lenses behind the curved ports, which I know you've used extensively, so you're probably the best person to comment on that.
So I would say, very few people use those shorter focal length macro lenses behind a curved port.
Yeah.
But I think when you do, the few people have, they do blow you away on image quality. And I would say that is the gold standard. I would say, having shot this, the corner sharpness this produces is closer to the curved port than it is to the flat port, which is very impressive. And I'm not just going to sort of say, take my word for that. I've prepared a few slides for us to roll onto and have a look at. and I'll bring them up and we'll talk through them. So the first slide is just a picture of it sitting on the sand, and it sits very nicely. I mean, this is just, I took it off to take a photo, and then I decided, I'll take a photo of it. You can see it sits very happily like this because it is very buoyant at the nose end, and that's part of what makes it nice to handle underwater. I think the first few pictures are with and withouts. So this is without, so this is a straight 90mm, and then swinging the MFO-3 into position, the same two fish, it's really quite a lot wider. So it's a really quite a significant change. It's not a little bit wider, it's really a very different shot. And I think it's very well judged how much of a change it makes. There's a few more examples of this because it's quite hard to do because you can't use fixed focus to gauge the distance. You basically just have to stay still yourself and do the two shots. Obviously, the front element is a bit closer to these two than it was in the previous one because I've obviously swung around, 10, 15 centimeters of lens into position to take this shot. And these are done with keeping the back of the camera consistent. If I pulled the front of the camera consistent, I'd have to pull back for using this lens, and it would be even wider. So it's a really big change. So these are another before and after. So 90mm on the left, on the right, the 90mm, but with the MFO-2. So it's 3, sorry. It's really quite a big change, and there's just another pair as well here. Horizontals, 90mm on the left, and then just swinging it into position and shooting the same scene again. It really gives two very different opportunities with the same subject, and I think that's really worth stressing. It's quite a big change. It's not a small change.
Here's one thing I did notice compared to shooting those shorter, just the standard shorter focal length macros, is because it focuses so closely, you almost get a close focus wide angle type perspective when you're shooting it with that in place, which you don't actually get when you have the 50 behind a curve port or something. You get a wider field of view, but because it doesn't focus right on the glass like this appears to, you don't quite get that perspective, which I think is an interesting one, and probably a selling point even for people like me who have the 50s behind the curve port. This would be it'd be an expensive one to add for shots like this, but I can see where it has its usefulness.
But if you are, a Canon or a Sony or a Nikon shooter and you only own one macro lens, this is a lot cheaper than buying a new port, a new autofocus macro lens, and all of that stuff. So I think it makes a very strong case for itself. And then the fact that you can then have it on every dive with you, so you never have to make that choice. Anyway, I'll roll through some of these. This is just another example of shot with the 90mm and then shot with the MFO-3. Big change. This picture here, this is just a test shot to look at corner sharpness. So I focused on the coral in the middle, and then we're just going to zoom in and look at the polyp detail in the bottom right corner. So hopefully you can get to see these quite big screen at your end, Matt, so you can comment as well. So this is just zoomed in. You can see how much. This is just in Lightroom. It's just a screen grab in Lightroom. And I would say that corner sharpness is definitely better than you would get with a 50 or 60mm on full frame behind a flat port in the corners. And it's getting pretty close to what a curve port gives you, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's definitely closer to the curve port than it is to the flat port. I mean, if you're nitpicking, there's definitely a difference between this and the curve port, but you have to be really paying attention to it, and have to be really anal about it. But what's the aperture of this? It's too small for me to read at the moment.
It's f13, I think. So I didn't even think about that.
So here's the advantage though with the curve port is you could shoot the curve port at like f4 or f3.5 and still have the really, really sharp corners. I wonder how this would look shot that wide open. Man, I don't know if you tried that or not.
No, it didn't even cross my mind. I just felt for normal shooting, this is giving excellent corner detail. Yeah. But yeah, I would say it's just that little bit behind the curve port. But, the flexibility of having this and having the other at the same time is really worth a lot. Right, I'm going to move on through my slideshow. Just to show a few pictures I took with it. It definitely allows you to do these wider macro shots. This was just a little evening gathering of white-bellied damselfish that were amusing me because they seem to be having this like little chat almost in mid-water with them all like buzzing around. So yeah, just this little fun little gathering. This was just an encounter with a green turtle on the reef. And again, you know, you often bump into turtles when you're shooting macro, and you end up doing those headshots. And I was quite impressed that I was able to, without backing miles away, I was able to get really quite a decent, you know, size picture of the turtle. You know, obviously the face, but also getting more than just the face into the picture. This shot here I've shown, this shot is not in focus. And I think this is where the MFO aspect of it is perhaps, I would probably like it to be able to focus a little bit further away. This turtle is quite a long way from me. It's shot with a, you know, a macro 60mm, 50mm equivalent macro lens. It's shot, you know, with a 90mm and an MFO-3 on it, as all these pictures are. I think at this range, I would like it still to be able to focus, and it doesn't. The turtle needs to be a little bit closer. If I zoom in and show you the zoom in on this one, you can see it's just out of focus. And it just needed to come a little bit further forward. Now, this lens is not designed, you know, this is not what it's optimized for. You don't put a macro lens on to go and shoot turtles with blue water around them. But it would have been nice that this shot doesn't have to go in the bin, just because it's it's just it's not a great shot. I mean, I'll put it in the bin anyway, but it's, you know, to show you what the limit is. So very far away subjects you can't focus on. They do need to come into range before it will focus. Right. But it's, you know, its bread and butter is this sort of thing. You know, I was very confident having subject matter running to all the corners of the frame, because the image quality definitely extended, you know, edge to edge, very well. And, you know, it's got great sharpness, nice colors. It did definitely, and there's just a couple of shots of that nice, pretty triggerfish, with blur. Some macro shots shot with it. One of the things I really like about having that wider macro lens option is I could have shot both those subjects with the 90mm, but I'd have been backed away from them. And one of the great things about having a wider macro lens is you're able to wrap your lighting around the subject. And I know this is something you do all the time, Matt, in your shooting, and how that wider macro lens allows you to be really close to the subject. And therefore, you know, this one is lit, you know, kind of top like this. Dropping that shadow below it, picking it out from the background, making this stonefish look nice and lumpy and bumpy. This one as well. And I just think that wider macro lens makes this type of lighting so much more possible. And I think that's something I really liked about it when I was shooting it. Cool. Yeah. And this is an inward lighting shot of a moray just coming off the reef. You know, just again, because the moray was so close to my lens, it was so easy to inward light this guy and just make him pop from the background, and that sort of thing. And these are just a few unprocessed pictures I just grabbed to show sort of the variety of shots, the amount of space you get with this lens relative to a normal macro lens. The final few that I've got in here are just to show the maximum magnification. So this is a picture that I took by holding my thumbnail up in front of the lens, and this is about as close as I felt I could comfortably light. Although the front of this lens is relatively small compared to a port, by the time you're this close, it's very hard to get the light onto the subject. So this is probably, although it will focus right onto it, you can't really light stuff here because of the lens itself and how well people can see me. I'll hold it to the side, so away from my face. You know, so this is probably about this far away, you know, to take this shot. And I think the next shot is a comparison. So the picture on the left here is just a texture shot of mushroom coral taken with the 90mm and then taken with the 90mm and the MFO-3 on the right. And I didn't quite get the same level of magnification. So I think because of the shading and, you know, ultimately, you know, I think when something is here, it's still probably not quite 1-to-1, but it's pretty close.
Yeah.
You know, there's a small drop of magnification compared to the straight lens, but not a big one. Right. I think that is the end of that slideshow. So hopefully that was useful to people to see the maximum magnification. But I think whenever you shoot with a 60 or 50mm macro lens on full frame, you're not chasing that 1-to-1. But I think one of the advantages that those lenses give you is the ability to screw in a lens like the CMC range and do some wider super macro-y type stuff which this doesn't allow you to do. Although I don't see any reason why you couldn't put an additional kind of close-up lens on the front of this again, except for the fact it doesn't have any threads and it's bigger than the 67 mm thread at the back. It's a much bigger. It's probably 77 at the front or 70, yeah, 80 or something.
Is
But
it a
there's no thread
bayonet?
on it for attaching a
Is it a
close-up
bayonet
lens.
on the back?
Sorry?
Is it a
No, it's the
bayonet on the back?
normal Nauticam 67 mm thread, so it
Okay.
goes on those flip filters.
Oh,
And
okay.
although it's big, it is light. It's much lighter than people expect. Right, let me
Yep.
get out of this. So, that's pretty much, I think, everything so yeah, as I said, it was motivated for me at least, by wanting to have a lens like that, really for Blackwater. I didn't get the chance to shoot it for Blackwater. I have to say, in the Red Sea, it's not, or certainly the reefs I was diving, it's not really the place for a wider macro lens. I look forward to taking this more in a muck diving site like Blue Heron or Lembe, or I'm going to love it in Canada, having this in the 90.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. There weren't actually in the Red Sea. I was favouring the 90 much more than this, because in those reefs, a little bit of clear water standing off the fish tends to work better. And I didn't do any Blackwater diving on this trip. I know Mike Bartik's been shooting it, so I'd encourage people to see what Mike makes of it when he does some extensive Blackwater photography with it. But it was kind of, it was motivated by wanting a lens like this for Blackwater. So hopefully it works really well for that. But I didn't have the chance to try that on this trip. And yeah, my only other note I've got down here is to apologize to Matthew again for liking flip filters. Finally, after all these years.
I do know that we had wanted to touch real briefly before closing on the MFO-1 again,
Uh,
since there does still seem to be some confusion out there about that lens.
yeah, the MFO-1 is best thought of simply as a weak close-up lens. So when you've got, you're shooting with your 90 or your 100 mm, 105 mm lens, and you've got as close as you possibly can to the subject, but you still can't feel the frame with it, that's where the MFO-1 comes in. It's designed to just give you that little bit extra magnification, but with really good image quality. And, for me, if you use the SMC range has great image quality, but they're really strong. And
Yeah.
the MFO-1 was designed to plug the gap between having the straight lens and having the SMC range. And so that's all it is. Nauticam also made a lot of fuss and noise about the fact that because it pulls the focus range closer, your lens is less likely to hunt, so it helps the autofocus. And also because it corrects for the flat port a little bit, as this one does, it improves your corner sharpness a little bit on your macro pictures. And both those things are true, but those aren't the main reasons to buy the MFO-1. The MFO-1 is for when you want to have a bit more power than your standard macro lens, and to have that with exemplary image quality, which brings the other two into play. And I think by promoting this, it will make your autofocus better, it will make your image quality better, everyone is focused on that aspect of it. And if you just treat it as a high quality, weaker than an SMC close-up lens for when you need that little bit more power for, kind of nudies and shrimps and things like that, but not teeny tiny macro subjects, I think that's the best way to appreciate the MFO-1. And I love the MFO-1. It's my most used close-up lens over the last 12 months, without a doubt. But I have to say that the thing I don't want to dive without when shooting macro anymore is this, because you want that option. You want that ability to take, even if it's the same subject, two completely different shots of the same subject. And I have to say that I asked Nauticam to look at this idea, based around a specific need, and that was really kind of around Blackwater photography and the lack of shorter focal length macro lenses on certain systems. And actually, in use of it, I'm going to use it for every macro dive. And yeah, I just don't see myself wanting to do a macro dive without having this. Even if I use it for one shot, it's worth taking it on every dive. So yeah, I'm very impressed with it.
Well, I hope I get to. I haven't actually shot either of them, the MFO-1 or the MFO-3. slash two. But they both look really compelling. So hopefully at some point I get to. But thank you for that breakdown of it. I enjoyed all those images as well, and everyone knows I love weird fish, so the stonefish stood out for me for sure. And you have to throw in your video of them all,
Yeah, yeah.
whatever
I'll
they were
put that
doing.
when we talk about the Red Sea in
Yeah,
general. I'll show
yeah,
that video. So
cool.
yeah,
But thank you guys for watching. We have more gear talk and more catch up soon. So we will see you in the next episode.